There are very few people in the world, and more so in India, who inspire with decency, with a strong set of values, who believe in what they say, who are torchbearers of not just a legacy, but who are deeply passionate about India. Even fewer are from the world of business. But today, I have a guest who is not just a colossus, but actually an inspiration to people across ages. Age doesn't define him, his work does. And he continues this tirelessly as someone who always believes in what he does and does what he believes in. Welcome, Mr. Tata.
Thank you, Sahil. It's nice to be here.
Sir, Ratan Tata Trust will be completing almost 125 years of its existence, the first of the trusts. When you look back at the work that the Tata Trusts have done, what do you feel, and what ignites this feeling of compassion and giving back?
Well, I have a great sense of pride that over these 125 years, Sir Ratan Tata left his legacy to the philanthropic causes, followed by his brother, Sir Dorab Tata, when he passed away, did exactly the same. And over the years, Tatas have been structured by the holding company or the proprietor's ownership being held by two charitable trusts, and over the years, an increase in the number of charity trusts that were created to work on the disparities that one found in the country, at that time a colonial country, and to work for the common good of the common man. This was a different thing. It set up cancer hospitals, schools, and institutions of that nature. It had also dealt heavily in terms of individual hardships. So through the years, the trusts have dealt with individual hardships. They have given scholarships to students. We've had past presidents of India who have been scholars of those Tata scholarships. We have created institutions which stand today, like the Indian Institute of Science, which the trust did not actually set up. Jamsetji Tata set that up.
But there's an interesting anecdote there, right? Between Swami Vivekananda, the conversation that Jamsetji Tata had with Swami Vivekananda aboard a ship.
I don't specifically know about that conversation, but they met each other and were inspired by each other. I know that. So over the years, the trusts have focused on either creating institutions that serve the common good, like cancer hospitals, etc., and institutions of learning, some international and some domestic, and causes which were said to be for the common good. What is refreshing is that the holding company for the whole Tata Group, which Jamsetji Tata set up, that 66%, or at that time more, 85% of its income and dividend outflow became income to the trusts for the common good of the Indian citizen and foreign causes.
But as you rightly said, at that time there was no need, there was no mandate. Today we have CSR, much abused as it is a phrase. But what do you think went through the minds of the founders when they set this up, and especially transferring their value in Tata Sons to the trusts?
Well, I think it was a different view of ownership. Mr. J.R.D. Tata often used to refer to Tatas as being the trustees of the people. The Tata family could have become tremendously wealthy by having distributorships, partnerships, etc. in the businesses. But most of the businesses, whether it was steel, whether it was power, or institutions, were set up as institutions for the country. So Jamshedji Tata could just as well have dedicated Tata Steel to the nation or dedicated Tata Power to the nation. They belong to the shareholders and to the people. Personal ownership and personal wealth happened when it happened, but was never the criteria for these companies to be established. So it was natural that he did leave his ownership to his two sons, and then his two sons, who had no children, left them in charitable trusts as beneficiaries of the companies that they held. So it was a refreshing change that gave way to ownership in an industry not being for the beneficial interest of A or B or C, but for the better good of humanity.
So if you look at the trusts today, they span a wide range of sectors. And there's a certain stress that you've laid on technology being a great intervention in some of the applications. Where do you believe the transformation of the trusts actually began, and why?
Well, you know, if you look at India through the years, the needs of India have changed. We had famines, food famines in the British times.
Yeah.
We don't have famines any longer. We had a majority of the people living in the rural areas. Today there's a mass migration to the urban areas, giving finally an important issue of creating an important issue of urban poverty and hardships that didn't exist before. There was the creation of jobs in industrial organizations. Today, automation and differences in terms of value chains, etc., make human jobs less important than machine jobs in many companies. So the needs of the nation have changed. Food shortages continue to exist in pockets. Water shortage is something that never existed in the past, but is an issue today. A much larger population and creating jobs and knowledge. These are all issues that are issues of the changing times. For the trust to continue to do what they did at the turn of the century would be to be sitting in the twilight thinking that the issues of the country were the same. And to me, that would have been a disappointment. So I think the trusts have gone through and are going through a transformation that, to use short term, is making the trusts relevant today. If we had not done that, they would have become irrelevant and creator of edifices that stood out as evidence of what the trust did, but did not make a contribution to the country.
While I completely agree about the relevance of the trust, the one thing that a lot of people talk about is the Tata culture, the Tata way of life. If you work for the Tatas, on the one hand, it's almost as we are working for a family. On the other, it's almost as if you're part of a legacy. How have successive leaders, you, before you, JRD, how have you managed to retain that Tata culture in times which are sadly materialistic, competitive? How have you maintained that culture?
First of all, that culture becomes embodied in the DNA of an organization. It's set off by the early leaders, the founder in our case, who never was in need of wealth because he had it all, but it wasn't what drove him. Success of giving India its own independence in steel or power or the hospitality area were what gave him the pride that he had made India self-sufficient. He didn't at that time look at the companies as being his, but belonging to the country. Somehow that prevailed through the years, through his sons, and then through J.R.D. Tata for 50 years or so, where J.R.D. would stand in a line rather than jump
Beat
a
the
queue.
Yeah.
Where he would give way to a customer first and not him. And that humility, I think, became embodied in what all the leaders of Tata companies had done. And we should protect that ferociously. The day we lose that, I think we've lost an important facet or input in the companies that we have. And the day we decide to cheat, the day we decide to do something that holds something for us and not for the customer, I think we will have lost a very, very important asset.
Has it been tough to stick by these values, especially during times when values were being trampled upon because of politics, competition, blah, blah, blah? Were there times that you often felt that, thank God, we are not the shortcut Tatas? Because you could have taken that shortcut.
Yes, I'd be lying if I said there weren't moments when those issues came up and those decisions had to be made. Happily, at every time, boards stood together and leadership stood together in saying that's not what we do. We, over the years, on occasion, have suffered as a result of that. But on the whole, I think we have, I believe that it's very important to come back at night and say, I have not succumbed.
I love that. Because it's very easy to succumb.
Yeah.
I mean, you must have faced political pressure, economic pressures, and yet you stood the course.
Sometimes you didn't know if you were doing the right thing. All things are not black and white. You have a choice. One choice leads you down a certain path long term. Another leads you down another path short term. And then you have to weigh one issue against another. Hopefully you make the right decision. Sometimes we don't, but we do it with innocence or naivety rather than intent and negativity. So I think that's a sort of dilemma that faces many leaders in the corporate world or politics. So it does in the business community too. He invited me to come to move the factory to Gujarat. And I said, we'd come if we had a home. And he said, I'll get you the land you want in 3 days.
Amazing.
And then he delivered that. On the third morning, he said, Ratanji, here's the land that I promised. And that just doesn't happen in India. So Mr. Modi, as Prime Minister now, is offering India, the Indian people, a new India.